Elena had always found peace in the solitude of the forest. A skilled wilderness guide, she was accustomed to long treks through remote mountains, far away from the noise and distractions of the world. The forest was a place where she could be herself, where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Today, however, something felt different. The stillness that usually comforted her seemed heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. It was early morning, and the sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the forest floor. Elena's boots crunched softly on the dry leaves as she moved through the trees, her breath steady as she walked. She had come out here to test her survival skills, to push herself, and see how far she could go in the wilderness. But as she moved deeper into the forest, something caught her attention. A faint noise reached her ears, like a rustle of leaves in the distance. At first she thought it might be an animal, a deer or a bear, perhaps. But as she moved closer, the sound grew louder. It wasn't the usual sounds of wildlife. It was more like the groan of someone in pain, a human sound. Elena's heart began to race as she followed the noise, her instincts kicking in. She wasn't sure why, but something about it made her feel both uneasy and compelled to help. She pushed her way through the underbrush, moving quickly but carefully, until she came upon a small clearing. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a figure lying on the ground. The first thing Elena noticed was the strange glow. The woman lying on the ground had skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint light, as though she were somehow otherworldly. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, with sharp cheekbones and long, flowing hair that was a deep shade of purple. The woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow, and her clothes were torn and covered in dirt and blood. Elena's mind raced. She had seen injuries before, but nothing like this. The woman was clearly in bad shape, but Elena couldn't tell who she was or where she had come from. As a survivalist, she had encountered lost hikers, injured animals, and even the occasional traveler who had gotten lost. But this was different. Without hesitation, Elena knelt beside the woman, her hands trembling slightly as she checked for a pulse. It was weak, but steady. Elena let out a relieved sigh, then quickly assessed the situation. The woman had deep gashes on her arms and legs, and her face was bruised, as though she had been struck or thrown. There were also strange markings on her skin, symbols that Elena didn't recognize. They looked almost like tattoos, but they glowed faintly, adding to the strange aura around the woman. "Hey," Elena said softly, trying to rouse her. "Can you hear me?" The woman didn't respond, her body limp in Elena's hands. Elena gently lifted her, careful not to aggravate her injuries. She had to get the woman somewhere safe, somewhere she could tend to her wounds. Elena's cabin was a few miles away, far enough to provide shelter, but close enough that she could make the journey without too much difficulty. As she lifted the woman into her arms, Elena felt a strange warmth emanating from her. It wasn't heat, exactly, but more like a gentle hum of energy that seemed to flow through the air. Elena shivered involuntarily, brushing the sensation aside as she focused on her task. She needed to get her to safety, and fast. The forest was dense, but Elena had traveled these paths before. She moved with practiced ease, her eyes scanning the surroundings as she made her way through the trees. The forest, which had once seemed so still, now felt alive with tension, as if the very earth beneath her feet was waiting for something to happen. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. The woman in her arms needed help. It took nearly an hour to reach the cabin, and by the time Elena arrived, the woman was still unconscious, her skin cold to the touch. Elena didn't waste any time. She laid the woman down on the cot in the cabin and began working quickly to clean her wounds. Her fingers moved with a practiced speed, applying pressure to the worst of the cuts to stop the bleeding. She found a few herbs in her pack that she knew would help with the healing process, and ground them into a paste, carefully applying it to the woman's injuries. As Elena worked, she couldn't help but study the woman's features. There was something regal about her, even in her unconscious state. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her face like a veil, and her skin, though battered and bruised, seemed to glow with an inner light. Elena had never seen anyone like her before. The markings on her skin seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if they were alive, reacting to the woman's breath.
"Who are you?" Elena whispered to herself, her voice barely a breath. There was something about the woman that felt otherworldly.
She had the feeling that she wasn't dealing with just any lost traveler. It was hours before the woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open with a soft gasp. Elena was sitting nearby, keeping a watchful eye on her, but she didn't want to startle her. The woman's gaze was unfocused at first, her pupils dilated, as if trying to make sense of her surroundings. "Where am I?" The woman's voice was soft, but there was a certain strength to it. Her accent was strange, foreign in a way that Elena couldn't place. "You're safe," Elena replied, her voice calm and steady.
"You were injured. I found you in the forest."
The woman's eyes widened slightly, and her hand instinctively moved to her side, as though checking for something. Elena had seen this kind of reaction before in people who had been in dangerous situations. But the woman's movements were slower than expected, as if her body didn't quite respond the way it should. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice weak. I don't know how I got here." Elena didn't want to press her with questions yet. The woman needed rest, not interrogation. But the longer she looked at the woman, the more questions she had. Who was she? How had she ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, alone and wounded? "I'm Elena," she said softly, hoping to offer some comfort. "I live nearby. You're safe now." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes closing once again as she drifted back into unconsciousness. Elena didn't mind. The woman needed rest, and Elena was content to let her have it. She sat by her side for hours, waiting for any signs of change, her mind racing with questions. There was something strange about the woman, something otherworldly. Elena couldn't explain it, but she felt as though she had stumbled upon something much bigger than herself. As the day turned into night, Elena built a fire in the small stove in the corner of the cabin. The warmth of the flames filled the space, and the smell of herbs and burning wood drifted through the air. The night outside was quiet, the forest calm and still. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. Something was watching, something that didn't belong to this world. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound from the woman on the cot. Elena turned to see her stirring once more. This time her eyes were clearer, and she looked directly at Elena with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Thank you," the woman repeated, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life." Elena nodded, not knowing what to say. She felt a strange sense of connection to the woman, as though their fates were somehow intertwined. She didn't know who the woman was or where she had come from, but Elena knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change forever. The days that followed were filled with quiet uncertainty. Elena did her best to keep the woman, Lyra, as she had come to call her, comfortable, but the questions kept piling up in her mind. Who was Lyra? Why had she been in the forest? And why did everything about her feel so different from anything Elena had ever known? Lyra had become more alert over the past few days, but she remained quiet. She seemed to be processing everything around her slowly, as if the world she had woken up to was too strange for her to comprehend. Elena tried not to press her for answers, allowing her to heal at her own pace. But there were times when Elena couldn't help herself, when her curiosity pushed her to ask. One evening, as the fire crackled softly in the cabin's hearth, Elena found herself sitting across from Lyra. The woman was sitting up now, her posture still weak but steady. She had stopped looking at her injuries, and instead, her eyes seemed to focus on the stars outside the small window. "You've been quiet," Elena said gently, her voice cutting through the silence. Is there anything I can do for you? Any questions you have?" Lyra glanced at her, and for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of something. Was it fear? Maybe it was just the lingering effects of the trauma. But Lyra's gaze soon softened, her eyes becoming distant again. "I don't remember much," she said, her voice barely a whisper, only fragments. There was a fight, an explosion, and then nothing. Just emptiness. Elena's heart ached for her. She had been in similar situations, being lost and unable to recall the events leading up to it. It wasn't easy to let go of the past, especially when the pieces didn't fit together. "I can't imagine what you must be going through," Elena said. "But you're safe now. You're not alone." Lyra's lips twitched as if she wanted to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. She looked down at her hands, her long fingers tracing the strange symbols on her skin. The markings, which had originally seemed to glow faintly, had started to fade with time, but they still held an aura of mystery. Elena wondered if they were part of Lyra's past, a story she was yet to tell. "I'm not from here," Lyra murmured, breaking the silence. "Not from Earth." The words struck Elena like a thunderclap. She had suspected as much, but hearing Lyra admit it aloud made it all feel real. The alien woman wasn't just lost. She was from another world entirely. Elena struggled to keep her expression neutral, though inside her mind was racing. "I knew that already," Elena said, trying to keep her tone casual. "Where are you from, if you don't mind me asking?" Lyra hesitated for a long moment before responding. "I come from a distant place, a world far from here, beyond the stars. It's a place of peace, of harmony. Or at least it was." Her voice dropped as if the memory of her homeworld pained her. Elena waited, not wanting to interrupt, as Lyra continued. "I was the leader there, a queen," Lyra said, her words heavy with sorrow. "I was supposed to rule, to bring peace to my people, but not everyone wanted that. I had enemies, those who wanted power, those who didn't believe in the ideals I stood for." "A queen?" The woman who lay before her, battered and broken, was royalty? She had trouble processing the information. A queen? Here? In the wilderness? It was as if she were listening to a story from a distant, unimaginable reality. Lyra's voice shook slightly as she spoke again. "I was betrayed by those I trusted most. I had to flee. My enemies, those who wished to destroy me and my world, are still hunting me." Elena leaned forward, her heart going out to Lyra. She had no idea what kind of enemies could pursue someone across the stars, but the pain in Lyra's eyes was clear. Whatever had happened, it had left deep scars on the alien queen, both physically and emotionally. "You're safe here?" Elena said firmly. "No one will find you in this forest." Lyra didn't answer, but her gaze seemed to sharpen, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Elena could feel the tension in the air, and for a moment it felt like the entire forest had fallen silent. The world outside the cabin seemed to hold its breath, and then, just as quickly, the stillness broke. Lyra's body stiffened, her eyes widening. Elena felt it too, a sudden, undeniable presence. It was as though the air itself had changed, become heavier, charged with an invisible force. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena froze, instinctively looking around the cabin, though she couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. She could feel the energy in the room, the way it seemed to hum in the air. Something was out there, something powerful. "Elena," Lyra continued, her voice urgent now, "I need you to listen to me. You have to leave. You're in danger." The word sent a cold chill through Elena. She had been trained for emergencies, for survival, but this was different. "I'm not leaving you," Elena said firmly, her voice unwavering. "We're in this together." Lyra's eyes softened for a moment, and Elena could see the conflict within her, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Fear, anger, and a sense of urgency. "You don't understand," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "They will destroy everything to get to me. And if they find you, if they find us, there won't be any way to protect you." Elena clenched her fists. "I don't care about that. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. I won't let them take you." Lyra looked at her, her eyes searching Elena's face, trying to understand the determination that burned within her. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. It was clear that Lyra was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but there was a fire in her still, a queen's fire that refused to be extinguished. "You're right," Lyra said softly, her voice strong once more. "I won't run from them any more. I will fight." Elena stood up, feeling a surge of adrenaline. They had to act fast. The cabin, while hidden deep in the forest, wasn't completely secure, and if Lyra's enemies were close, there would be no time to waste. "Can you fight?" Elena asked. She wasn't sure what Lyra was capable of, but she had seen enough to know that the woman wasn't just an ordinary person. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the energy around her. The symbols on her skin began to glow once more, faint but unmistakable. Elena could feel it too, the air crackling with power, a hum of energy that seemed to pulse with life. "I can," Lyra said, opening her eyes to reveal a deep, intense focus. "But I won't be able to do it alone. I need your help." Elena nodded. "We'll fight together." For the first time since Elena had found Lyra, there was a sense of purpose in the alien queen's eyes. Elena wasn't sure what kind of battle lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't about to let anyone harm her or the woman she had come to see as a friend, a protector, and maybe even more than that. The hunt had begun, and they would face it together. The tension in the cabin was unbearable. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on them, a storm of danger that was rapidly approaching. Lyra sat by the window, her glowing eyes scanning the woods outside, her expression grim. The woman had not said much more since their brief conversation earlier, but Elena could sense that she was preparing herself for what was to come. Elena moved to the small table in the corner, checking the equipment she had gathered over the years. It wasn't much, basic survival gear, a few firearms, and a couple of knives. But it would have to do. Her heart pounded as she considered their options. If Lyra's enemies were as powerful as she claimed, a simple cabin in the woods wasn't going to offer much protection. The time for hiding was over. They had to face whatever was coming, and they had to do it now. "You said they were coming," Elena said, her voice steady despite the nerves buzzing in her chest. "How soon?" Lyra didn't turn from the window. "They are close. Too close. I can feel them. They can sense my presence. Can you fight them?" Elena asked. Her voice was low but firm as she wiped the sweat from her palms onto her pants. "Will you be able to defend yourself?" "I can," Lyra said quietly, but her tone was laced with something darker. Uncertainty, perhaps. She was tired, that much was obvious. Whatever had happened to her, it had taken a toll on her body and mind. The energy she had once seemed to possess so effortlessly had diminished. Lyra turned toward Elena, her eyes now full of determination. "But I need you. I can't do this alone." Elena nodded. She understood. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Lyra face whatever was coming by herself. They had already been through too much together. The bond between them was stronger than Elena had expected, and now she couldn't imagine leaving the alien woman behind. "Tell me what to do," Elena said, walking toward her. "I'm with you, no matter what happens." Lyra gave a small nod, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Elena. I won't forget this." Elena wasn't sure how she could help. She had always been able to survive in the wild, to live off the land, but this was something different. A fight against enemies who could track them across the stars? She had no idea what that kind of battle would look like, but she would have to adapt quickly. As Lyra closed her eyes, focusing her energy, Elena's gaze wandered to the sky outside. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest. The air felt thick, charged with something she couldn't explain. The hum of the energy around Lyra was stronger now, and Elena could feel it too. A faint vibration in the air, as though the very forest was holding its breath. "We can't stay here," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence.
"The forest won't hide us for long. They will find us."
Elena's heart raced. Where do we go? "I have a place," Lyra replied.
"A safe haven. It's hidden, but we must move quickly.
If we don't, we'll be caught before we even get a chance to fight." Without wasting another second, Elena grabbed her pack, slinging it over her shoulder. She didn't question Lyra's decision. They had to move, and fast. The two women slipped out of the cabin, the night air cool against their skin. The forest, which had once seemed so peaceful, now felt like a maze of shadows and secrets. The trees towered above them, their branches creaking in the wind. But it wasn't the wind that made Elena's skin prickle. It was the sense of being watched, of being hunted. Lyra moved quickly and silently ahead of Elena, her pace unhurried but purposeful. Elena followed closely behind, staying on high alert, her senses sharpened. The path they were taking was familiar, but the weight of the situation made it feel like she was walking through a completely different world. The quiet was oppressive, the kind of silence that only comes when danger is near. After what felt like hours of walking, Elena's legs began to ache, and her breathing grew heavier. But Lyra didn't slow down. She kept moving forward, never once looking back. Elena had no choice but to keep up. Finally, as the night grew darker, they reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, half hidden by the overgrowth of vines and trees. It was ancient, its surface worn and weathered by time. Elena couldn't help but stare at it in awe. This wasn't something built by human hands. She knew that immediately. The design, the material, the way it seemed to blend seamlessly with the forest. It was alien, a relic from another world. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. "The place where I will make my stand." Elena approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the perimeter. The structure was surrounded by thick trees, but there was something about the area that made it feel protected. She didn't know how to explain it, but the energy Lyra radiated seemed to make the space feel safer, as if the very ground itself recognized her presence. Lyra stepped forward, her hand brushing against the stone. The surface shimmered for a moment, and Elena blinked, wondering if she had imagined it. But then the stone began to shift, sliding open with a low, resonating sound, revealing a dark passage beneath the structure. "This way," Lyra said. She didn't look at Elena, but instead entered the passage without hesitation. Elena followed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her with each step. The passage was narrow, winding, and damp. The air grew colder as they descended, and Elena felt a shiver run through her. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the sense that they were entering something ancient, something that had been hidden away for a reason. She couldn't help but feel like they were on the edge of something much bigger than either of them. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened up into a large chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols glowing faintly in the dark. In the center of the room was an altar-like structure, its surface carved with more of the same symbols. There was a faint hum in the air, a vibration that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "This is where it all began," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "This is where I was born. My people, my ancestors, they built this place." Elena took in the room, her eyes scanning the strange, otherworldly artifacts that filled the space. She had never seen anything like it before. The designs were alien, but they also felt familiar, as if they were part of something much older than humanity. It was as though the room was a bridge between two worlds, one that Elena couldn't yet comprehend. "You said you were a queen," Elena said, her voice low. "What does that mean? What kind of queen are you?" Lyra turned toward her, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "I was meant to rule my people. I was their leader, their protector. I was supposed to bring peace to my world. But the war changed everything. My enemies took everything from me. I had to flee, to escape." Elena felt a pang of sympathy for Lyra. She couldn't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for her to lose everything she had ever known, to be forced into hiding. "But you're not alone anymore," Elena said softly. "We're in this together." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "I know. I won't let them take you from me." Before Elena could respond, the sound of movement above them interrupted the moment. The vibration in the air had changed, growing heavier, more oppressive. Lyra's face hardened as she turned toward the entrance. "They're here," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We have no time left." Elena grabbed her weapon, ready to fight alongside Lyra. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. She didn't know if they would survive, but she knew one thing for sure. They would fight together. The battle was about to begin. The silence was broken by a sudden, low rumble. The walls of the chamber trembled slightly, as if the very earth beneath them was warning of what was to come. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she focused on the sound. Elena stood beside her, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been in a situation like this, never faced an enemy like the one Lyra had described. But the fear that threatened to take hold of her was quickly replaced by something else. A fierce determination to protect the alien woman who had become more than just a stranger. "They're coming," Lyra said quietly, her voice calm but filled with an intensity that Elena could feel in her bones. Elena didn't need any further explanation. She could feel it, too. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. She gripped her weapon tighter, her eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of movement. There was no escape from here. Not unless they made a stand, and it had to be now. "They'll be at the entrance soon," Lyra added, her tone decisive. "We have to fight, and we have to win." Elena nodded, her mind racing. She had no idea what kind of enemies they were up against, but Lyra had already shown her that she was far from powerless. Her abilities were unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed, and she had to trust that Lyra could protect them, if only long enough for them to escape. But there was no time to think about escape now. They were here. They had to face them head on. The rumbling grew louder, and Elena's senses heightened. She could hear the sound of footsteps, quick, deliberate, and heavy, echoing from above. She could sense them, closing in. Whatever they were relentless. "Get to the back," Lyra instructed, her voice unwavering. "I'll handle the front." Before Elena could respond, Lyra raised her hands, her fingers glowing with an eerie light. The symbols on her skin flared up, brighter now, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The energy in the room crackled, and the temperature seemed to drop. Elena could only watch in awe as Lyra's powers surged, her body becoming a conduit for an energy she could barely comprehend. The rumbling stopped for a moment, and then the sound of footsteps intensified. It was like the ground itself was shaking in anticipation. Elena knew that whatever was coming, it was going to be dangerous. She glanced over at Lyra, who was standing tall, her expression determined and fierce. "They're here," Lyra whispered. The entrance to the chamber suddenly burst open, and the light from the outside spilled into the dark room. Figures appeared in the doorway, tall, armored beings with glowing eyes and strange markings on their armor. Their presence was intimidating, their weapons raised as they stepped into the chamber, their movements precise and calculated. They were here for Lyra, Elena realized. But they weren't just hunting her. They were hunting both of them. Elena took a deep breath, positioning herself behind a large stone pillar. She steadied her weapon, focusing on her breathing, and prepared for whatever came next. She had no experience fighting enemies like these, but she had learned long ago that survival often depended on quick thinking and the will to fight back. Lyra's gaze locked onto the intruders, and a sudden wave of energy pulsed from her hands. The force sent a shockwave through the chamber, knocking the first few attackers off their feet. The ground beneath them cracked, and a massive energy barrier formed around Lyra, glowing with a fierce intensity. Elena couldn't help but stare in awe as Lyra held the barrier in place, her body surrounded by a protective shield of light. But the attackers weren't intimidated. They quickly recovered, their movements quick and fluid, and advanced toward Lyra. Their weapons hummed with a low, threatening sound, and they didn't hesitate to fire. Lyra's barrier absorbed the first blast, but Elena could see the strain in her eyes. She was pushing herself, and the effort was clearly taking its toll. "Move!" Lyra shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Elena didn't wait for another command. She rushed forward, using the pillar for cover as she darted across the room. She moved quickly, her focus on the enemies in front of her. The first figure raised a weapon, aiming directly at Lyra. Elena's heart raced as she fired, her shot hitting the attacker square in the chest. He stumbled back, falling to the ground, but there were more of them. Too many to count. Lyra's barrier flickered for a moment, but she didn't stop. She kept the energy flowing, creating powerful pulses of light that pushed the attackers back. Elena continued to fire, each shot carefully aimed, her hands steady, despite the chaos around her. But there was no time to relax. A second wave of attackers emerged from the shadows, flanking them on both sides. They had surrounded the chamber, and the room felt smaller with each passing moment. Elena knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They had to escape, and soon. Lyra's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Elena saw something there, something more than just a queen. It was a quiet desperation, a plea for help. Elena understood immediately. They weren't going to win this fight by just holding their ground. They needed to escape, and they needed a plan. "Elena," Lyra called out, her voice fierce. "Get to the altar. I'll hold them off." Without hesitation, Elena nodded and moved. She sprinted toward the altar, using the confusion of the battle to her advantage. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing. But she didn't stop. She could hear the sounds of fighting behind her, the shouts and cries of the attackers, but she focused on one thing, the altar. When she reached it, she glanced back to see Lyra surrounded by the remaining attackers. The energy barrier flickered again, and Elena could see Lyra's face twisted with pain. But still, she held them off, her hands glowing with light. Elena knew what she had to do. She reached the altar and placed her hand on the stone surface. It was cold, but it hummed with a faint energy of its own. Elena didn't know what she was doing. She just knew that this was their last chance. She pressed harder, feeling the vibrations intensify beneath her palm. The room seemed to tremble again, and the altar responded, its surface shifting and glowing. A strange low hum filled the air, and Elena felt a pull, as though the very fabric of the chamber was beginning to tear open. She could hear Lyra's voice behind her, the sound of her powers struggling to hold the attackers back. She couldn't afford to waste time. With a final push, the altar began to open, revealing a hidden passage beneath it. The entrance was narrow, but it was their only chance. Elena glanced back one last time, seeing Lyra surrounded, her energy barrier barely holding. Elena's heart clenched in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. "Lyra!" she shouted. "Come on." Lyra's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment their eyes met, understanding passing between them. Without another word, Lyra pushed forward, her body collapsing the barrier and using her remaining strength to rush toward Elena. The attackers were close. Too close. But Lyra's power flared one last time, sending a burst of energy that sent the attackers flying back. Lyra stumbled, but Elena was there, pulling her into the passage just as the enemies regained their footing. The tunnel beneath them was dark, the walls narrow and cold, but it was their only hope, and they had to keep moving. Elena helped Lyra along, her heart still racing from the battle. They didn't have much time. They had made it into the passage, but the attackers would be coming for them soon. They had to get to safety, and they had to do it quickly. The passage twisted and turned, but Elena kept moving forward, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together.